Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Soo Kim, and I work with Rethink. I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, I would like to take a moment to explain a couple of things about the webinar process. During the webinar, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. So if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box on your control panel at the bottom of your screen. To practice using the Q&A box, I would like to ask that each of you to type in where you're from and what you do right now. One of the amazing things about webinar is that we get to engage and share learning from all locations all over the world. So I'm in New York. Where are you? We see Seattle, all right, San Francisco, Hoboken, okay, Michigan. Wow, okay, all over New York, America. This is great. Wow. New Jersey, Syracuse. Wow, great. This is awesome. Okay, so we also have a chat box that you can use to interact with our presenter and with each other during the presentation. Please note that questions go into the Q&A box and not the chat box. Please practice using the chat box right now and write how the weather's like in the chat box right now. Okay, sunny, chilly, sunny, 50 and gorgeous. Nice, wow. There's a lot of people coming in right now, overcast. Wow, this is great, awesome, thank you. All right, everything looks great. David, this is all you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody to our SEL Day panelists for SEL Day here in New York and New Jersey and where everybody is in the country. A little bit about SEL Day right now. SEL Day was conceived by Urban Assembly and the SEL for US organization in order to raise up the importance of social and emotional development across the world. And right now, just as a quick numbers check, as of now, we have about 650,000 people online who have been seeing the hashtag SEL Day online on Twitter. We've had about 2,500 tweets around hashtag SEL Day. We've had proclamations from across the country in Austin and New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to bring this all together and have a wonderful panel talking about social and emotional learning in time of uncertainty. And so what I'm going to do now is take some moment to introduce some of our panelists so you have a sense of who's here today. I'm going to start first with Ross Weiner. Ross is from the Aspen Institute. Ross is the Vice President and Executive Director of Education and Society Program. He leads a team of educators and analysts in creating a rich learning experience for education leaders and policymakers, and creates resources to assist leaders in improving educational outcomes. From 2002 to 2009, Ross was the policy director and then vice president for program and policy at the Education Trust. Ross also served for 5 years as a trial attorney in the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division Educational Opportunities section. Ross, would you want to say hello to our audience?
Hello, David, and hello, everybody. Happy SEL Day. Thank you for including me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Great. Our next panelist going to be introduced is Maurice Elias. Maurice Elias is a professor in the psychology department at Rutgers University. He's also the director of the Social and Emotional Learning and Character Development Lab, as well as the director of the Collaborative Center for Community-Based Research and Service. He is a past president of the Society for Community Research and Action Division of Community Psychology of the APA, and has received the Distinguished SCRA Award for contribution to practice and ethnic minority mentoring awards, as well as the APA's National Psychological Consultants to Management Awards. Professor Elias lectures nationally and internationally to educators and parents about students' emotional intelligence, school success, and social, emotional, and character development. Maurice, welcome to our SEL Day panel, and would you like to say hello to the audience?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm also pleased to represent senior citizens among the panel.
Thank you. Our next guest is Heather Riemann. Heather has dedicated her career to ensuring that all youth have supports and services they need to succeed in school and life. Prior to joining EdTrust, she serves as the Senior Director Senior Education Advisor for a Corporation for National and Community Service, an agency dedicated to improving lives and strengthening communities through service and volunteering. She also served in the Obama administration as the Chief of Staff in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education, and as a Senior Policy Advisor at the U.S. Department of Education. Heather is currently the Director of P-12 Policy at the Education Trust. Heather, would you like to say hello to our audience?
Yeah, thanks so much for joining everyone today. I'm really excited to be here and for this conversation.
Thank you. Our next guest is Kristen Hopkins. Kristen is an international social entrepreneur dedicated to the holistic development of youth and adults. As the founder and CEO of Dangers of the Mind, LLC, Kristen has developed and implemented social emotional learning, culturally responsive resources in schools, nonprofit organization, and has brought her teachings to Haiti and Ghana. In 2016, Kristen became a recipient of the 30 Under 30 Award for Women of Excellence in Leadership. Ms. Hopkins is an esteemed author of multiple books, a curriculum and intervention kit for in-school suspension and youth detention centers. As a result, she has established a lifestyle brand via virtual coaching, a clothing line, and brand ambassadors that embody the DOM movement every day. Kristen looks to continue to do this work and be the voice of responsive resources of disadvantage for our youth in this generation and beyond. Kristen, please say hello to our audience today.
Hey, 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 everyone. How are you? Excited to be here.
All right, moving down to our students, Ariel Fernandez.
Hi, how's it going? I'm grateful for this opportunity to be here.
Welcome, Ariel. You are a senior at the Urban Assembly School for Collaborative Healthcare. You've been enrolled in school at Collaborative Healthcare for your entire high school career.
Yes,
You've had the opportunity to work at Futures and Options as an intern, and you've also had an opportunity to work at Triarch. You were interning at Triarch, where you really thought about the importance of social emotional learning in developing a safe environment for patients. You want to speak about that and when you're saying hello for a second?
So I wanted to, well, I worked also for Triage, and I'm also still enrolled in a clinic in, I believe, Richmond Hill. It's called MediHealth, and the point of like the social emotional like awareness for it is that when you're dealing with patients, you have to understand that they're always there for a reason. They're not there because, oh, they just want to stop by, but they're there because they're in pain or something. And understanding that they're there and you have to provide for them and actually like mentally support them or physically as best as you can. It's important for everybody to acknowledge that and understand that.
And this is a really important time to give a shout out to all of our healthcare workers who are on the front line battling coronavirus. Not only using their social emotional skills, but using their medical skills to keep our country safe. So thank you, Ariel. And last but not least, we have Anastasia Morris. Anastasia is a 17-year-old junior here in the Urban Assembly School for Collaborative Healthcare. You are from Jamaica and moved to America when you were 7 years old. You transferred to UASCH mid-year, tackling 3 AP courses and care a lot about learning about the healthcare field. Anastasia, do you want to talk about a little bit how you came into SEL in the context of healthcare?
Well, recently last year, my guidance counselor introduced me to SEL in advisory, and I was really interested about it because I know as a student that transferred, it could be hard for you to adapt to new environments. So like she really put me through that process, and that's how I started.
Excellent, excellent. And so now, as we've gone through our introductions, I'm David Adams, Director of Social and Emotional Learning and co-founder with SEL for US of SEL Day. And we're gonna have some time to think a little bit today about social and emotional learning in a time of uncertainty. As Sue was saying, please use the chat to have conversations. If you guys have things that you need to talk about or things that resonate with you, feel free to use the chat. We're gonna be monitoring that chat. If you have specific questions that you would like the panelists to ask, towards the end of this conversation, we're gonna have some time to have a question and response for our panelists. And before we get started, I wanna thank Rethink Education for giving us an opportunity to use their platform here on Zoom so that we can go out on hashtag SEL Day and increase awareness of social and emotional learning. So now that I've introduced a little bit, do you guys want to tell us a little bit about your organizations and what SEL skill that you have been using the most to get through the last couple of weeks? Let's start with you, Maurice.
Okay. Well, you heard a little bit about my organization at Rutgers University, the Social, Emotional, and Character Development Lab. I've been doing this work for 40 years, so I'm also involved with the Academy for Social Emotional Learning in School, and I'm a member of the leadership teams for SEL for US and SEL for NJ, about which I will say more later. And the thrust of all the work we do is to try to prepare kids for the tests of life and not a life of tests, and to really try to do research and development to foster what we call optimal feasible practice. The skill that I've been using most this past week is apologizing, which I have used with my students at Rutgers for all of the online Zoom teaching errors that I have made in this first week, including signing myself out of my own class while the class was going on. And if apologizing doesn't seem like a skill, I would say then problem solving in the face of obstacles, because I think that's been a very common thing for all of us.
Excellent. And Maurice, you're getting some shout outs and getting some love on the chat from some Academy, SEL Academy graduates giving you some love. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for introducing. We're going to move over to Heather. So Heather, tell us a little bit about your organization and what SEL skill have you been using the most in the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, hi. So I'm here at the Education Trust, and the Education Trust is a nonprofit organization that works to close opportunity gaps that disproportionately affect students of color and students from low-income families. Through our research and advocacy, we support efforts that expand excellence and equity in education and create the political and public will to act, with an emphasis on to act. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm really excited about this conversation. And the social emotional skill I've been using most, it's probably sort of like relationship skills and teamwork. Both sort of teamwork between me and my husband as we try and homeschool my 7-year-old twins. A lot going on with that. And teamwork sort of all across the Ed Trust organization as we scramble frantically to make sure sort of equity is at the core and forefront of the pandemic response.
Thank you so much, Heather. Kristen, we're going to move to you next. You know the question, you know the answer. Tell me a little bit about yourself and your organization, and what SEL skills have you been using to get through our coronavirus crisis?
Yeah, so Dangers of the Mind, you know, it's a lifestyle brand, it's a lifestyle organization, and a lot of times people think about Dangers of the Mind, I always get people looking like, what is that? So I want to just talk about it really quick. It talks about the attacks we have against our thought life that shift our progress. So things like brokenness and fear, insecurities, perception, complacency, ego, and pride. We're able to align those things with social emotional skills for kids to be able to overcome, and not just kids, but adults as well. And then we also focus the bulk of our work on working with kids that have behavioral challenges. So we're committed to, of course, shifting the narrative of high-risk students to high promise stories, to culturally responsive social emotional resources, and of course work with the in-school suspension section as well as restorative practice centers, and then we also work with juvenile justice, and then I'm trying to think of, well, we've made it into this huge lifestyle brand. It was actually a book, and then it turned into a curriculum, and it kept going. But I'm really proud of what we've done so far, because we've done some extreme work where a lot of kids come out of the program and then they have no additional supports, and so we have a brand ambassador. So we have about 85 brand ambassadors on different college campuses, still in high schools, that support our brand, that rock our gear, and that literally use this as a tool outside of school. And so I'm really proud about that. And then the SEL school I've been using the most, funny, I have two. I'm going to cheat. I have two, because I've been literally, I'm going to say personal and then the business side. So from a personal side, I've been self-aware. I have been identifying like serious emotions in this moment, because I'm an extrovert. So I love people. So if you guys, send me some good energy, say good energy in the chat box, because I love people, and I've been literally trying to figure out how I can reach more people in, what I'm doing. Yes, I love it. Good energy, good energy. Yes, I feel the energy. So I'm excited. I got dressed today, I'm excited. I did my hair today, so I was excited about that. But I've been really doing some self-perceptions to understand why I feel the way I feel. And you know, how can I change that? So I've been asking myself a question every day. Do you feel your best self at the end of the day? And last week I kept getting no, no, no. And I'm like, what in the world? You know, and so this week I had to realize that it was because I love being around people, and it's been a kind of a shutout zone for me. And then from a business standpoint, responsible decision makings, I've been really focused on analyzing the problems and solving, you know, our getting the best solutions for our companies. So as a business owner of multiple companies, it's hard to, you know, be in this time where we're in uncertainty when we don't know what's happening. So, you know, coming up with innovative solutions and continuing to stay on top of that with my company is a top priority for me. So that's what I've been working on.
Outstanding. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you for your energy. Thank you for your passion and excitement. We're going to move over to Anastasia. Anastasia, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then tell us what SEL skill you've been using.
Okay, my name is Anastasia Morris. I'm a junior at UASCH, Urban Assembly School for Collaborative Healthcare. And during this time, the SEL skill that I've been working on is self-management. And that's because we're at home. This is something that we never experienced before. And the teachers, they've really been making it a priority to make sure that we have our work, we're feeling okay mentally, and that, you know, at this time, we're getting kind of lazy because we're at home and we're oversleeping. So it's really easy to slip off from your priorities. So self-management is something that I'm working on right now. Making sure that I'm not procrastinating, making sure I'm completing my work on time, and reaching out to my teachers. Yeah.
Outstanding. Thank you. Thank you. And then moving over to Ross. Ross, what SEO skill have you been using? And tell us a little bit about the work at Aspen Institute.
Yeah, so I've really been using mindfulness, actually, just trying to center myself, focus on the things I can't control, be able to kind of not give too much attention to the things that I can't control. And that's just been something I've found very useful over these last couple of weeks. So the Aspen Institute broadly is an organization that convenes leaders and really supports them in taking action on society's most pressing problems. And I think one of the ways we do that is by creating spaces for them to be thought partners and critical friends to each other, but also by ensuring that enduring values and first principles are really brought to bear on how we address society's biggest challenges. In the Education Society program, we do that by bringing together education leaders across policy and practice. Again, really creating spaces for them both to learn from research, but also from to be able to reflect on their experiences and to learn from the experiences of others. And so like we connect folks, we frame up big issues. And one of the ways we've done that over these last few years is by sponsoring the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development, which is where I first got to know you, David, and your work at the Urban Assembly. And I would just encourage folks, there's tons of resources at anationathope.org. And I'm happy to put that into the chat, but would love for folks to look at those resources because they cover a lot more than we're going to be able to today.
Great. And Ariel, last but not least, we want to think about you and think about what you're doing, and also think about what SEL skills that you're thinking about.
Well, for me, I've just been at home, the same as Anastasia, been completing assignments, but one SEL skill that I've been utilizing at home has had to be responsibility. I'm the oldest of my family right now. I have little brothers at home, and I have to be responsible enough to, get them to wash their hands, take the necessary precautions to, cleanse themselves and not have them risk being able to get sick with the pandemic that's going on like right now. So yeah, I feel like responsibility is probably the one that I'd utilize.
Look, real talk, I left my ball on the couch the other day and my kids came up to me and said, Dada, you're supposed to be responsible. So I have to get up off of my screen, go back and take my pole and wash it because you gotta lead from the front. So speaking about this notion of responsibility, Ariel, you've been doing some SEO work for a little bit of time. Can you tell us a little bit about what social and emotional learning is and why it's important?
All right, so social emotional learning teaches us how to relate to ourselves and others in our community in order to help make the best decisions possible and ultimately solve problems. In fact, one social emotional skill that I've learned throughout my years of going to school is self-management. And this is something that I struggled with early on in middle school because, well, in regards to me not being able to complete my homework assignments and stuff like that. So But with the use of the skill, I was able to, manage the time frame that I do my homework in. And as a result of that, I was able to study as well on the side. And ultimately, that helped me get my academic performance up and get the grades that I wanted throughout my high school years.
Wow. So it sounds like self-management has been something that's really helped you to kind of guide yourself and help kind of think about what your priorities are.
Yeah.
Anastasia, what are your thoughts about SEL skills that you've learned, and how have you translated them now that we're all in a virtual kind of context? Like, how do you learn SEL skills and practice them if you're not in school?
Well, our school has really been implementing social media and mass media. So we have things like Google Classroom, that's the learning platform that we're using. And we have Instagram, where today is, we're celebrating National Women's History Month. So we're doing a Spirit Week, and students can post online like a specific color. So we would match them with a leader like Mother Teresa or etc. And students could really interact with each other and see that like we're all connected. Meanwhile, understanding that the SEL is still a part of school, and the teachers has really been active because they all have social media, and students could add them and contact them. And we have hangouts where you could call the teachers and respond to them in the Wintel. So they're really up to date on keeping the students and being there for them mentally and making sure that they're okay through social media and mass media.
Wow. Thank you, Anastasia. Ross, I'm going to ask you the next question here. You've been writing recently about the role of the education system vis-a-vis the larger society. The Aspen Commission has been focusing on social emotional academic development. When you hear Anastasia talk about the virtual community that the Urban Assembly School for Collaborative Healthcare has built, and her focus on social emotional skills, what do you think about this moment in American history and the role that SEL is playing?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I really appreciate starting off with those perspectives from the students and hearing about how their schools in the Urban Assembly are attending to social emotional development even in this time. I think we have to recognize, right, the centrality of relationships in learning. Relationships are the lifeblood of learning and of thriving in life more generally. And schools, for so many students, maybe for most students, are the sort of the organizing principle of their social development. Absolutely. I mean, look, family is the first and most important place where young people learn social emotional skills, learn the different ways that what's valued by their own community. But then school is a place where they put that in the context of the broader society and where they start to learn how to be a part of a bigger community. And again, for many students, school is a really critical place where they experience safety, belonging, and where they learn to develop healthy relationships. And I think it's so important right now that schools continue that focus. So we've seen a tremendous, I am so thankful for the educators and the school system personnel who have, thrown in and stepped up to focus on availability of food first, to focus on distance learning and the availability of academic resources. But we also have to keep relationships intact through this time. So I will love it if the students will talk at some point over the webinar about what you've been sharing with me about virtual advisories, about one-to-one connections that are being made between teachers and students, and even interactive discussions where students are maintaining their relationships with each other. All of that is tremendously critical at this time where we have physical distancing, but we need to maintain social connection.
Wow, thank you for that. And Ross, you talked about this notion of physical distancing and social connection, which I think is so powerful. And Heather, you actually have gone out and EdTrust has spent some time actually going to the field and asking people, what do they need in terms of social and emotional learning? And what are some aspects of social emotional development that we can improve upon? What's going well? What did you learn so far in terms of what people are saying about social emotional development out in the world?
Yeah, we've been doing some really fascinating research right now, and we sort of wanted to make sure we were centering the voices of students and the voices of families, and particularly students and families of color. So we went and talked with youth, sort of middle school and high school age, and families, Black and Latino families, about sort of how they perceive social, emotional, and academic development, which I'm going to call SEED, what factors they are considered particularly important for students of color, and what schools can do to sort of better support SEED. So we've been doing this research now for a while, and we will have a paper sort of coming out in the next couple months that goes more into depth, but I'm going to give you a little preview and sort of highlight some of the findings.
Great.
So one thing is that sort of for a lot of students, it was really important that identity was sort of at the core of social, emotional, and academic development. And it's like a really important to create learning environments where students can be their authentic selves and where students can see themselves reflected in the curriculum and learn about their history. So that came up repeatedly with students and families around the country, and I think is really important. One other thing that was interesting is students and families often felt that they actually had social emotional competencies at sort of a pretty high level, even a higher level, because if you're thinking about the sort of racist society that people need to navigate, being able to have those skills and navigate that often have really high level competencies that they aren't actually recognized for necessarily in schools and with teachers. So sort of thinking about how we can recognize those and think of the sort of an asset-based framing instead of a deficit-based framing. Let's see what else. And then this sort of goes along with that. Students didn't necessarily trust schools to be teaching social emotional learning. So I think that's something we all need to be cognizant as we're thinking about social emotional learning, is sort of how can we build that trust and how can we build the relationships. And that sort of leads to the next point, which is that students and families really wanted to be a part of the conversation. They wanted to be considered sort of an integral piece, and they wanted to make sure their input was part of the social emotional learning plans, and sort of making sure we're connecting to their communities and thinking about what the resources and assets are in communities and sort of making those connections stronger. And I actually think, thinking about our sort of current context and the pandemic we're facing, I mean, right now we are sort of bridging connections between families and teachers and communities in new and different ways. So sort of thinking about what we're learning in this period about how you make some of those connections and how we can sort of better strengthen connections with schools and communities and families, I think will be important over the next couple months, over the next year, really. And the other piece is thinking about, context just matters so much. And when kids eventually go back to school in the fall or whenever it is, thinking about what the resources and supports students are really going to need. Everyone who's going to have been through this sort of traumatic period, and we know that context matters. So what are the resources and supports that we can provide to students as we sort of come back to school as well?
Wonderful. I appreciate your focus on the notion of how are we kind of braiding our schools and communities together. And we're going to get back to Ross in a little bit, but I think he's going to talk a little bit more about that relationship between schools and a larger community. But before we do that, I want to go over to Kristen. Kristen, you've spent a lot of time thinking about schools and students who have been forcefully socially distanced from their communities, right? And so what are your thoughts right now on the place that we're in and the implications for social and emotional learning, given the context of your work and students who have been forcibly removed from a larger mainstream society?
Yeah, so I'm going to break this question down into like 3 parts. But first, we're going to talk about equity, because that's what I'm very passionate about in the lane that I'm in. And so even though ESSA has been in a place, or in place, since 2015, we still see a huge gap in equity in America's disadvantaged students and students that have high needs. And due to this gap, our schools right now are not equipped with technology and resources to practice culturally responsive SEL. And with this current pandemic that we're facing, distancing, it becomes very strenuous for us to effectively produce distance learning with our students. So if you think about it, you see kids that are in environments where they have no internet access. You know, we have kids that, or schools that may not have enough computers to give to kids to be able to use that. And then we have kids on their phones trying to access, you know, the curriculums or distance learning from their phones, and they might be sharing phones with their parents. And, you know, we don't have the parental support in these environments all the time. Not to say that everyone's not supporting, but majority of parents, there's a lack of support in these environments. So we don't have parents who are forcing their kids to do distance learning or forcing their kids to get on. So a lot of our kids are kind of like hanging out during this time. And that's a big issue for us, because, you know, with thinking about going back into our environments, we have to do a lot of work, a lot of SEL work to get these kids back self-motivated, to get these kids back disciplined, if they have no one at home that is doing such. So I just wanted to talk about kind of the need that's happening right now. And then when we talk about social distancing, our kids have been, you know, social distancing for a while now, if you really, really think about it, and not just in the alternative context, but when we think about the process of alternative schools, I really just want to make it clear that kids are removed from their home schools, right? And then they're forced into a different environment, an environment that's been labeled, you know, as bad. So they're already having walls up when they're going to the environments, and they're disconnecting themselves from their natural relationships that were already established with their students, with their peers, with staff. And so it kind of creates two options, because social distancing is from a physical aspect, and it can also be a mental choice. And so a lot of our kids in these spaces social distance from a mental choice. And so that's something that we can think about, you know, when just thinking from the alternative lens and what we see, because, you know, we have kids that come to schools that may avoid a teacher that they don't like, and they act out intentionally so that they can go to an ISS or restorative practice center and isolate themselves even more. So looking at those patterns is really important as educators, to make sure that we understand before this, you know, this word has got kind of blown up, but before, kids have been doing this all along. We just have to check those patterns. And so, for example, you know, just thinking about a kid in our program, you know, he would go and come into class, and he would go right in the corner and put his hoodie on and put his headphones on. And then over time, we saw how SEL helped him get out of that shell. And so I want to talk about that too, because, you know, social distancing and SEL is really important, and being able to reach a child. So what I've learned specifically through all of this is that our students in these settings, like everyone has already talked about, is relationship skills is foundational. And so kids that are dealing with, I mean, we have 46% of kids in this nation that have had one adverse, you know, experience in their lifetime. So that means that if you think about alternative settings, that's like, imagine what we're going through with trauma in these environments. And so you cannot force social and emotional learning on kids, you know, if you don't have a relationship with them. It's not happening. You know, there's trust issues, they have these walls that are built up, you know, they have anger issues. And so if they don't feel like you're being genuine and authentic and real with them, if you're being consistent too, you know, because a lot of times you can have great relationships, but if you're not consistent, you know, if one day you walk past them and you don't say hi, or you're not like, hey, you know, it might trigger them in a wrong way, because guess what? They haven't had consistency in their lifespan. They haven't had a role model that has shown them love. You know, even a hug or a smile is really big things in these environments for our kids. And so that core relationship skill is really important, because students are observant too. So I would encourage staff to really, you know, be conscious of that, you know, in these environments, and making sure that they're modeling these skills for our kids. And then I want to touch on we can really touch on a lot of the culturally responsive pieces, but I want to touch on some of the things that lessons we've learned with social distancing as well. So we do like a concept called 2 for 2, and it's where we ask a question, you know, a teacher would ask 2 questions, and the group or the class would come up with 2 questions to ask the teacher. But what that does is, and I'll just name a couple of examples. So one example is, what's one positive decision you made today? Or is there anything that you feel would interfere with your learning today? Or what makes you act out of character, or makes you happy? But by asking those little questions, you're doing a lot of things with those 2 questions. You're, you know, finding out a child's emotions. You're, you know, giving them confidence to talk about how they feel. You're, you know, allowing them to understand their decisions that they make every day by consciously talking about it out loud. And then also you as an educator is doing some perspective taking to now be able to have proactive ways to figure out the behavior patterns that happen, through these kids' emotions. And this will ensure having healthier and consistent relationships. So I think that's one of the things that we have practiced a lot with seeing our students social distance in the times that we're in right now. But in the times we're in right now, I mean, hopefully we can get better with, the technology and, encouraging students to when a staff is on a distance learning with them, to kind of say, hey, how you feeling on a scale of 1 to 5? Like, let's figure out how our kids are feeling in their home environments, because there are some patterns that we can tell if kids are, are struggling in these spaces. And, one of the things that I thought about, I'll be honest with you guys, the first thing I thought about when this whole thing happened is my heart dropped, because I'm like, we have kids that, yes, they've been social distancing, but they've also social distanced at home. They only go home to go to sleep. They might not like their environments that they live in, but now they're quarantined to these environments. So there's a lot of things happening in these environments where they might not have food. We all have different situations. We could be watching Netflix and chilling. We could be eating some food and getting fat. These are situations, but then we have these kids that are in situations where their parents are trying to figure out how am I going to eat for the next 2 weeks? Or, they might work at restaurant jobs that are closed down, and, they might not have money coming in. So there's a lot of frustration that could be going on in these cases. And so I encourage educators, like as we do SEL in our homes over this time span, that we are really doing perspective taking and really having empathy for our kids, because we know some of those kids that in the back of our heads that we know have patterns of behavioral issues or patterns of social distancing already. And now we're realizing that, whoa, they're in these environments now that they can't get out of, and so that's kind of where, I want to go. I want to go deeper with this, but what I will say is that we're all in this together, so that's one of the things. And a lot of times teachers, when I go speak, they'll ask, how can you relate to kids that you don't have any relatable kind of like strengths, with these kids? You don't have anything that you can tie to them, but now we do, so if you think about it, these are great ways to say, how can we relate and come back and talk about the things that we all survived, because we're going to survive this, but we're I think it's important for us to kind of think of ways that we can relate to our kids moving forward.
Great.
Social distancing.
Thank you, Kristen. And so, Maurice, so we had a lot of great thoughts here from Kristen, particularly around this notion of trust and relationship building. So I know you at Rutgers have been focused on the work with STAT and Youth Nation. And so can you tell me a little bit about what you're learning from your work and the implications for our current challenges as a national community in the context of building relationships?
I want to start with just asking folks to use the chat box to reflect on all that they've heard so far, especially what Kristen said. I mean, there's a lot of things that really benefit from, I think, further reflection. And so let me start by saying some of the things that I've learned, and then I'll go on to talk about STAT and Youth Nation. I've learned that marvelous things happen when you trust and empower students. And not only have we seen this in the social, emotional, and character development area, but I want to say that this has been true in my own lab, because my lab, the social, emotional, and character development lab, has been powered by talented grad students, undergrads, including David Adams many years ago, postbacks and postdocs, and as well as our educational colleagues across the US and especially from New Jersey. But all this work, everything we're doing is enriched from the perspective of students and young people and our future leaders. And my perspective on SEL is that it represents a fundamental set of competencies and character attributes that determines how we interact with one another, understand ourselves, and every aspect of life. It's really how alphabets underlie all reading and writing and other communication. So SEL has everything to do with teaching, learning, parenting, and responding to pandemics. And so we have neglected this critical factor, and I think now we're all realizing how important it's going to be. Pragmatically, I've also learned that someone has solved almost any SEL-related implementation challenge that's out there. but we lack the mechanisms to capture and share that knowledge. And so this slows down our innovation and success cycles, just as we're seeing in the response to the pandemic. A lack of coordination, accurate information, sharing, and planning costs lives. And the same thing is happening to our schools all over the country. Inequities in SEL service delivery is costing lives among our students. So I want to violate webinar ethics for the moment and say a little bit about SEL for US. I'm going to ask folks to grab their phones. Those of you who are listening now or listening to the recording, take out your phone, go to SEL4US.org and join. SEL for US is a grassroots multi-state alliance whose purpose is to share best practice policy and research information about promoting social, emotional, and character development in our young people, schools, families, and communities. We know a lot, but that isn't being shared. And not only that, the more diverse and inclusive the membership in SEL for US, the better SEL-related implementation will become. And if your state is an SEL4 state, you should join your state organization also. And it's just a concern for trusting students and their well-being and empowerment, which is why my lab has developed innovations like Students Taking Action Together, Mosaic, and in collaboration with Urban Assembly, we're working on Youth Nation. Now, Students Taking Action Together is a set of instructional procedures completely aligned with social studies instruction and standards that teaches young people skills for societal participation and informed social action, while also helping them learn SEL skills like empathy, perspective taking, communication, and problem solving, so that it enhances their understanding of historical content, current events, and how to address and resolve school-related problems. We underutilize our kids now to help make our own schools and society better. Mobilizing our young people in the same spirit that Sergeant Shriver did with the Peace Corps requires that they have strong social, emotional, and character competencies and know how to use them. In STAT, students learn to respectfully formulate and share their views, listen to others, debate differences, and analyze and problem solve both historical and current dilemmas in civil and collaborative ways. These are skills that it wouldn't be bad for Congress to have either, actually, but that's another story. Whether it's anti-gang or anti-drug or anti-bullying policy, how to deal with a new student coming into your school, how to help children and classmates respond to the coronavirus, what do you do when a kid in your class is chronically absent? Young people need to learn social studies and civics by living it, not just by reading about it. So the STAT instructional strategy, which helps kids to learn how to define their problem, list options, create action plans, and notice success. This can be used by those teaching students live or virtually to engage in the business of problem-solving assistance during the pandemic. I mean, again, kids aren't just victims sitting at home. Kids are as perplexed and troubled by all these issues as anybody else. Why aren't we engaging them in helping to think of solutions? It's not as if the experts have the answers. It's clear that they don't. So let's give our kids the opportunity to think now and then eventually think preventively, because quite honestly, that's what we have to be looking at. The lessons that we've learned now from this is about the importance of building SEL into the lives of our students for the future. And Youth Nation, which Dave mentioned, is a website that gives students voice to articulate their views on social and historical and societal issues so that they learn from one another how to shape their communication and how to most accurately reflect on their own ideas and the perspective of their listeners and readers. So again, we've got to empower our kids. We've got to teach them social action and leadership now. And finally, as we think preventively, one of the things I've learned is that we have to change how we prepare future educators and educational leaders for their jobs, because their jobs require them to have social, emotional, character development and school climate building skills. It is an absolute necessity. Our Academy for SEL in Schools, selinschools.org, is trying to do this now with our current educators, but we also have to be thinking about all the educators coming down the pipeline and how to get them ready. So these are the things that kind of keep me up at night, and some of the things that we've learned along the way.
Thank you, Maurice. And of course, shout out to Rutgers Social and Emotional Character Development Lab, where I did attend as an undergrad and helped me put me in the place that I am today. So thank you, Maurice, for your contributions to not only New Jersey, but the country and the world. And speaking of the country and the world, Ross, I'd like to just briefly go back to you with regards to this notion of community. Maurice talked a lot about what are we doing to empower young people to build community, and what's the purpose and role of the education system in developing that. So before we get back to Ariel and Anna, who are going to tell us from the young people's perspective, given that we've been talking a lot about young people, what are your thoughts about the role of the education system vis-a-vis this larger society, and what can we be doing to improve it?
Yeah, so it's something we've been spending a lot of time listening to how folks are framing these issues and thinking about. And I think it's just important to acknowledge schools are central to the social contract, right? They are in a large part about preparing people to both to become their best selves, but to take their place in society. And that schools have always been about academic learning, but they've always been about more than that as well. They're about developing as a person and trying out different ways of being in the world. And I think, you know, one of the things that we need to really recognize is that there are both national and global implications that we have to deal with, but we have to be dealing with those in the context of local community ownership and empowerment. So, I mean, when we think about what the sort of external dynamics are, right, the future of work is changing rapidly, and it's putting a premium on things like teamwork, the ability to communicate across differences. I mean, it's putting a premium on social and emotional competencies and skill sets. When we think about the health of our democracy and the breakdown in civil discourse, right, we need to be preparing people to be citizens, and part of that is about learning how to have civil disagreements and about how to process arguments and about how to manage disappointment when you are not the person who wins in a democratic decision-making process. And then another large dynamic that we have to contend with is the demands for a more robust conception of equity. And it's already been mentioned by some of the other panelists, but, you know, developing a healthy self-identity is absolutely something schools have a part of, affirming people both in their sort of in our shared Americanness, but also in the value of their own communities and the backgrounds and traditions they bring to school. Not saying you leave those things outside, but those are things that are affirmed and valued and are seen as assets for learning. I mean, the other part of that around the robust conception of equity is developing agency as an actor who sort of makes plans and changes conditions in the world, not as like an object of instruction. So all of those dynamics have academic as well as social and emotional dimensions. And I think super critical to then take an equity lens to those things and say, how do we, you know, activate the assets of students and families and communities? And that means that solutions absolutely have to be informed by evidence, informed by research, but locally designed and locally owned. And in the chat box, I mentioned 2 resources. I mean, we brought civil rights leaders and social emotional learning leaders together to craft a call to action around pursuing social and emotional development through a racial equity lens. And it's very much about affirming students, but it's also recognizes there's no one size fits all approach. This has to be in the context of community. And likewise, we created a guide, again, brought school leaders together to create a guide for school leadership teams around how do you integrate social, emotional, and academic development all together in how school happens, and really explicit focus on the equity dimensions of that, because people have already talked about it. Students are getting lots of messages that they're not valued by society and that they're not seen as for the brilliance and for the unlimited potential they actually have. So how do we think about social emotional learning as something that builds that? And that's not something that just happens through an intervention. It happens all through the school day. It happens in instruction. It happens in advisories. It happens in the whole climate of the school. So again, really delighted that this is something that Urban Assembly puts such a focus on, and we'll love to hear how that's playing out for the students that you've brought.
Well, thank you, Ross. Speaking of lovely and devastatingly brilliant people, let's go back to Ariel and Anastasia. So we've been talking a lot about students here. Marisa talked about empowering students. Kristen talked about some of the struggles students have in the context of social distancing. Heather talked about going out, talking to families and students about needing to be part of the process and the relationship of trust with the schools. And Ross has talked about the social contract, the thing that bonds us as citizens, as Americans. So starting with Anna, like, what about this kind of resonates with you? And what do you see, how are our communities changing if we could do a better job with social and emotional learning?
Well, I see our community changing in 3 ways. And in the school, I feel like the social emotional implication can really reduce conflicts within our students, especially in lower income communities, where in advisory, we learned that these students, Black and Brown, are being targeted for suspension. So skills like responsible decision-making can really prevent a student from getting into a fight. For example, a student can think about the consequences of like them getting a suspension. Like, do I really want to fall behind? Or is it really worth the, because when a student gets angry, they're not really thinking about that. So if we implement that, it could really prevent a lot. And for the career readiness aspects, we could implement students with goals. And having your goals increases the chance of having a promotion and reaching high places. Mm-hmm. And for the community, we think that just inspiring others around you and having social awareness. For example, one of my classmates mentioned that I inspired her to do an internship because she was really nervous about it. So when I heard that, I was really surprised, like I inspired the students even without being aware of it. So that's something that can help the community.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think you, not only did you talk about the importance of social emotional skills and things like internships and on the job, but also just in our interactions, right? Like, what does it mean to have choices and have decisions? And sometimes those choices and decisions are not fair, but my dad always said, you could be right, you could be dead right, or you could be wrong or dead right, right? And so just thinking about, how we make decisions in the context of our society and fairness. And so Ariel, speaking of that, what role do you see social emotional learning playing in 5 or 10 years, and how would your school or community change if we all embrace these kind of notions?
So for me, I feel like if our school, since our school basically implemented self-awareness and into our advisory and stuff like that, I honestly feel as if the student body as a collective would push forward into that agenda. They'd be more welcomed into like accepting students and making sure that they're not, I'm sorry. No, I'm the chat. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so making sure that they're following that agenda and making sure that they're making the parents and students feel comfortable at the school community and community at their own houses as well. And another thing that I'm kind of getting off topic, but I wanted to talk about this a lot and I've been waiting.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, the panelists talked about. Kristen, you brought something really important that I felt like my school has implemented into their thing. So I had this dean called Nick Stratweiser, and he talked about how it's important for students to be able to show like the responsibility to like the younger or the underclassmen as upperclassmen as well. And he made sure that we learn responsibility into like taking into account for let's say we are setting the example for like the underclassmen and keeping them away from fights, making sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And one thing was the turmoils at home, and I can relate to that because I heard certain friends of mine, they said that they don't really want to be at home because it's a very toxic environment that they live in, and they've gone as far as to say, "Oh, can I please come over to your house? Please, I don't want to be there." And it's something that I really like. It resonated with me so well because like, wow, I'm seeing teachers understand that, and from a student, we don't really get that as much or as often. It's like, I actually feel connected when you said that. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I think the notion of modeling, not only teachers modeling for students, but also students modeling for each other. Anna talked about modeling, being able to set goals. You have another thing, Anna?
I think I forgot to mention something. So my school has something called peer mediator. peer mediating, where students instead of teachers, they mediate the conflicts. So they put us in that situation because they feel like students will understand more if it comes from themselves instead of a teacher, and they could relate more. So they put us in that position. So not only does it give us a leadership role, it gives us experience to de-escalate conflict, learn conflict resolution. So.
So I'm going to open this up to everybody. I think Anna talked about this notion of how peers interact and being able to set the example for other people. And Ariel talked about an example that he had where people helped him and he's helping others, and the role of home and school and interacting with each other in developing and modeling social emotional learning. So to the rest of our panelists, how do you think our communities would change and our nation would change if we were to think about social emotional skills and the context for social emotional development as one of our #1 priorities?
I guess I'll jump in and start.
Go for it.
I believe that, you know, SEL will become evident within the workforce as students are able to start jobs and have solid foundations and social emotional skills. I definitely believe that there will be just a better economy all around, you know, for that. But also, something that I would like to see. I'm going to say something I would like to see. I'm just so passionate about the work I do, and I know that people, when they meet me, they could just tell. But one thing that I really would love to see is that we are able to mandate social emotional learning in alternative environments. I think that as you walk into a school, kids need to literally start with social emotional learning. That's the foundation of their success, and I believe that they've been struggling for a long time with this, and that's why they're getting kicked out of, you know, their home schools or their base schools and getting put into here. And then it's kind of like this trickling effect where sometimes they may get worse in alternative schools and they may go to youth detention centers after that. And so I think that, you know, I would love to see over the next 5 years for it to be mandated in alternative settings for not only kids to have social emotional learning, but also staff to have quarterly professional development, social emotional learning for staff, and have a licensed medical, you know, a licensed mental professional in those environments, because teachers are struggling, you know, educators are burnt out, and it's a lot, you know. So I from being in those environments, from walking the hallways, from understanding what staff go through, and we just released a podcast episode like 2 weeks ago. Our podcast called Dangers of Mind, but it's with Dr. Teresa McGowan. She's a principal at an alternative school in Durham, North Carolina, and she talked about, it's called What's the Alternative? And we talked about just alternative education in general, and how social emotional learning is the foundation of what these kids need in these environments, and how it needs to be on a larger scale, bigger budgets. You know, it needs to be, you know, just a place that SEL really sits in these environments where they know that they're coming here and their lives are going to be transformed, because we know, all of us on this panel know, everybody in this chat knows that SEL saves lives. It can save lives. We have seen it happen before. And I just strongly believe and hoping, you know, that we can do something to change in the environments that I work in when it comes to social learning. So that's what I hope to see in the next 5 to 10 years.
So, Heather, can I have you respond to Kristen's notion of mandatory SEL? I know you had talked about some concerns around the kind of trust that students have for SEL to be developed for in different contexts. So give me some thoughts about your sense of where SEL should be in 5 or 10 years, and where do you see it headed?
Yeah, I mean, I hope it's sort of really integrated into everything schools do, as opposed to being just sort of, we don't want like a 20-minute pull out a day where you focus on this specific thing, but that sort of we're creating these equitable learning environments that are really rich learning environments, and that students are a sort of key player and key decision maker and key voice in creating that change and creating those equitable learning environments. So sort of my hopes for where SEL are headed are sort of more an asset-based framing, and people really focusing on the sort of equity implications, and it being taken from sort of like this separate, let's just think about social emotional learning, to thinking about the sort of equitable learning environments and the whole context that's so important when kids are learning and developing these skills. And that sort of communities and ties with parents are really increased and seen as the assets which they are.
Wonderful. And Marisa, you talked a lot about this idea of SEL 2.0. So Heather talked about this notion of the environments and the contexts. Where do you see SEL headed in 5 or 10 years? And how does that relate to what are some other our panelists have talked about?
Well, I think it's important for us to make sure we are all clear that SEL doesn't refer to a very narrow set of skills. That by SEL, we're talking about the environment of the school and also character. And for example, one of the things that I think is going to be an implication of SEL being more pervasive is we're going to have a kinder society. We're going to have people that think more about other people and don't see themselves so focused on their own well-being and benefit, and recognize, in essence, that they're, as Martin Luther King said, you are no better than the person who you're connected to. We are all interconnected. And I think that to get to that point, we are going to need to not think about mandates. For example, we could mandate right now that everybody be tested for the coronavirus, but it's not going to happen because we don't have the infrastructure to do that. And so we could mandate right now that all schools do SEL, but it's not going to happen because we haven't built the infrastructure. So what we have to do to have SEL be pervasive 5 to 10 years from now is to really dedicate ourselves to build that infrastructure, as I was implying earlier, with how we train and credential educators and how we structure the school day, as Heather said, so that SEL is not just something you do during a class period, but it's a pervasive element of everything that goes on. And I just want to say, our kids want to go to schools that stand for something. When I was growing up, I went to schools with the inspiring names of PS 214 in Queens and PS 77 in the Bronx and Junior High School 185. When I finally went to a school with a name, it was Flushing High School. So I never got inspiration from my schools. But our kids need to walk into school buildings that stand for something. And so schools should not hesitate to declare what they stand for. We are going to be a kind school. We're going to be a school that promotes freedom, that promotes equity, inclusiveness, responsibility, and then live that, not just make it a slogan. That's to me SEL 2.0. Not only the skills, but the navigation of where we want to go as a society. And let's get there.
And let me turn this over to you quickly, Ross. What does the education system stand for, and what should it be standing for in the next 5 to 10 years? And what did our SEL skills and character development aspects have a role to play in that?
Well, it's a profound question. I mean, look, as I said before, schools are a reflection of society. They are the biggest investment that we make in including everybody and preparing people to take their place as a full participant in society. And so we have a lot of work to do, as the other panelists have named. I think we are likely to see SEL get more embedded. I mean, Maurice, I couldn't agree more around it's not a program or an intervention. It really is a holistic approach. It's in instruction. It's in the whole school climate. But that's a shift, and we have to recognize that. We have to narrate that for people and help them figure out how do they grow from having a program, having an explicit SEL intervention that they have purchased, they've trained people on, to really thinking about how does everybody in the school embody that? How are they modeling it and creating that environment for young people? And I will say also, right, in terms of schools standing for something, I think this is where we have to recognize there's both national and local implications here. So we want schools are a reflection of our values. But right now in this country, it is not very easy to agree on values at the level of what are we all going to embrace, through federal policy or even through state policy that's so contentious. So how do we empower schools and name this as something that's absolutely essential, but still respect that communities are going to have their own way of doing this, and that we need to be responsive to that schools need to be responsive to that community and be situated in community. And so that's a real, that is a balance that has to be struck. And I think we need to acknowledge that, because the values are, on the one hand, so important. And I think there's lots of shared values that will be reflected, but but people need to be able to own them and see that they were a part of deciding on those values for their families, for their community. I think just two other things quickly about, I think, how this is likely to play out and how it should play out if it's going to play the role it needs to. One is there's a huge investment in school climate surveys right now. That's really important. A number of states are putting that into school accountability. I think we should be, as a country, or at least in every state, in every school system, saying students deserve to go to a school where they feel safety, where they feel belonging, where they feel like they are a part of the meaning making in that school. And we can ask, actually, the whole school community, students themselves, parents, teachers, is that what's happening here? Is that what you're experiencing? And we can work on it. We know we can make school climate better, but we got to make it a priority. And then the last thing that I'll share right now, we have to recognize that adolescence is a distinct phase in cognitive and social and emotional development. We are learning the time of greatest development in the brain besides very early childhood, besides infancy, adolescence, and we've got to treat that differently. We've talked some about what the interests are in terms of students developing a healthy self-identity, developing agency. Those are critical tasks for adolescents, and right now, we need to right now, in a lot of schools, we've just kind of shifted some of the fundamental SEL skills up to how they apply to older grades. We've got to bring in these additional aspects of identity development and agency that I think haven't always been seen as a part of social emotional learning. It's absolutely critical to this being an equity enhancing work that we're doing. And so that's work that's going to need a lot of attention into the future.
Thank you, Ross. And Heather, I want to think about this notion one more time here with the context. Ross talked about our values as a society, and I know you've thought a lot about this. And how do we come together to articulate those values in a way that allow our students to have a consistent environment, a consistent experience in terms of their social emotional development? Do you have any thoughts around what you're seeing around how we can get to a place where people can come together in local communities to use SEL skills or not, but to think about how we kind of come together to understand values?
Yeah, and one of the things I've been thinking a little bit more about is there's a lot of community-based organizations and after-school providers, and kids aren't just in schools every day, but sort of where are all the different places that they are? And a lot of those sort of out of school time providers have really been thinking about social emotional learning for a long time and have a lot of like expertise in that. So sort of drawing on those resources and communities, and even right now in this time of sort of pandemic, what are those resources we should be looking at to sort of support and bolster what we can provide to students, I think is kind of critical at this juncture. That's one of the areas I think there's a lot of room to explore and a lot of room for growth. The other thing I've been thinking a lot about now is sort of the social emotional skills that parents need during this time. And especially if we're, I'm trying to like teach my kids math and teach my kids, but how do I think about social emotional learning and what I can help my kids do? So thinking about sort of making sure parents also feel engaged and feel equipped and feel like they have the skills and knowledge to really participate in this as well, I think is a critical piece. Yeah.
So it's like a whole societal kind of approach, right? Community organizations, parents, schools coming together.
Yeah, and that's really what we heard from families that they wanted. Like they want that to happen, and they think that their communities and sort of having teachers and educators better understand their communities will also sort of help bridge some of those divides.
And it's interesting because it also kind of bridges this equity conversation, right? In terms of not just perspective taking, but actually going into the community.
Yeah.
A number of our schools, our school principals, and I think including Ms. Hugie from Collaborative Healthcare, went door to door to make sure that our kids had devices so they could access distance learning. And sometimes that was one of the first times some of our teachers were in the community. And so it was just a really interesting conversation with regards to what does it mean to be in the community with your kids, and how did that influence the way that you think about teaching and learning. So what we're going to do now is we're going to open this up to question and answer. We're going to get Sue back on the line, and he's going to give us about 5 questions coming out from our panel now that we've cleared that up. And we're going to have our panelists respond to these questions. Then we're going to get back, do one more question, and then I want to call it a day. So Sue, can you bring up some questions for us that you think that have been reflective of what people are saying in the chat?
Yeah, people have been asking a lot of great questions. This is for Anastasia specifically. So what supports do you have to manage your time? I know my students are having hard time learning self-management. What has been most helpful to you?
Well, the thing that has been most helpful to me, like a person, would be my advisor, Mr. Blasi. So on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we have advisory meetings where students would connect to hangouts and we could discuss what's happening. And yesterday our SAT scores came out and she was talking about it, and she's been really the person that's been helping me manage my time and reminding me that I have to get it done. She says, I know it's hard, like we're getting new material, we're getting a lot of work, but she's been really there for me to help me manage my time.
All right, thank you. Okay, next question. Can we somehow rebuild our relationships now, even if we made a mistake with the youth/students? How do we rebuild trust online? Can you give us one good example of how to do this? So this is just an open question for everybody.
Kristen, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a couple ways to do it online. But like I said before, I had mentioned kind of like going in with asking questions about the kids first. So not going deep, like diving right into work, but just saying, hey, how was your day today? You know, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel? So that you can kind of understand, engage what they're feeling. You know, it takes time. I'm going to be honest with you. It takes time to gain students' trust, especially students that have had issues with it in the past. But I think that consistency is key. So if you guys are, I loved, I think it was Anastasia, what she said, that you guys are doing at Urban Assembly with the Google Hangout calls, and like, you know, allowing teachers to be available to call if they have a problem or they need some help. So I think that is definitely big right now, is like opening up ways for them to talk. And then of course, ways for them to talk when it might not just be about work, you know, when it's just a question. So right now, I think in these difficult times that we're facing, maybe there should be just a moment or a window in time where a teacher or educator says, hey, I have time between 10 and 11. Anyone want to call me to talk about their frustrations with the pandemic? You know, this is how we build trust, you know, with our students, by really understanding what they're going through. And a lot of times I talk about culture responsive teaching, and I talk about, we have to understand the culture before we can culture responsive teach, you know, before we can put strategies in place. So if we don't know the culture, we don't know what they're going through, how can we relate? And so I think that's the key to building trust between students. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it work. I've seen that kids start respecting you more. They'll come to you more. And so even having a gauge, if you guys are distance learning right now, having a time span to say, hey, from 10 to 12, I'm open. If you want to talk about your frustrations with this, if you want to just let some things out, if you want to have some, you know, a little circle, you know, with a group of different kids and you all talk, I would really encourage that. And then also I would encourage us being on social media more. I meant to say that earlier, we cannot beat social media. All right. We can't beat it. It's there. Our kids love it. You know, and so if you see Dangers of the Mind, we're actively on social media, specifically Instagram, because we know our kids are on there. So we've built this system that our kids can reach us wherever they are. And so since they're at home now, guess what? They're on social media more than they normally would be. So let's start, you know, changing the digital landscape, and let's start having more positive images from our organizations going out to reach our kids, and being able to have more interaction with our kids, because that's just ways that we can connect more and build that trust level for them. Because a lot of times kids are looking for consistency too. So if we're posting like once and they don't see us post ever again for a while, like they're not going to trust the organization. They're not going to trust, you know, what we're pushing out. But if we see them, or they see consistency in us, they're going to look for that. They're going to come on social media and look for your organization, or look for your facts, or look for your, you know, whatever you have that's pushing SEL in the forefront. They're going to look for that, you know. So just being able to stay consistent and being open with understanding what they're going through during this time. I think that's going to help build some trust.
Thank you, Kristen. I saw Anna kind of feeling you when you were talking about being on social media. She's like, "You're not going to win that battle."
I do want to add one thing too. I forgot to say that we do, our company does SEL forums for the community. And so we did one in September, which was our first one, and it was amazing. We had about 130 parents come out, and it was in 2 weeks of promotion. And so what that showed me was that there's a need, and parents do want to learn about social emotional learning, and they do want to learn what their kids are learning. But one of the other things that showed me that one parent told me something really interesting. She said, SEL is a luxury for me. And I took that and I was like, whoa. You know, I had to really step back, and I wasn't even going to judge her, or I had to evaluate what she was saying, because some of the parents that we deal with, you know, they're trying to keep the lights on, they're trying to pay their bills, you know, they're not thinking about giving their kids a hug, they're not thinking about saying, hey, how was your day today? Because they're so focused on surviving, you know. And so, you know, just taking that in consideration about making sure our parents are more involved in, you know, like Heather said, making sure our parents are more involved in the SEL process, so that it can be deeply embedded in not just the schools, but in our communities and in our homes, is very critical during this time.
Thank you. Sue, do you have next question?
Yes, another question, this is for everybody. What are practical recommendations for the aftermath of this critical time? How can we start to prepare now for when our students, teachers, and parents return to a new normal?
Ross, you want to take that?
Yeah, and I will love to hear other perspectives as well, but it's certainly something we started to think about. I mean, I think one is recognizing, as Kristen was talking about, we have to maintain relationships now. We can't think, okay, well, let's just get online learning up and running, and then we'll focus on the stress and the social and emotional impacts of the physical isolation later when we're back together in person. But there is going to be a lot to deal with when we come back in person. I guess I'll just say a couple of things. One, we need to recognize that as a priority. I think that there's going to be a lot of push to make sure that we, you know, make up for lost instructional time as a huge priority right when students get back. And we do need to do that, but we need to recognize that their sense of safety, their sense of belonging, their sense of being in supportive relationships is an essential on-ramp to engaging with that academic rigor. So we can't just try and go straight back into instruction. We're going to have to attend to the needs of students. And look, I think people are starting to recognize we're likely to be in a recession. There is not going to be enough money to handle this all as we would want to, with just all of the professional services flooding schools that are needed. And so we're going to have to be creative. One, we are going to have to prioritize, even among scarce resources, for this kind of attention. We're going to need counselors, social workers, but we're also going to need teachers, food service workers, bus drivers, everybody to be thinking about how they are creating those supportive relationships for students. And where there is trauma, we're going to have to be addressing it with more mental health services. I think one thing that I've been thinking about is, how do we make sure there's an investment in national and community service so that really we can get young people who want to be role models, who want to be mentors, who want to provide structure in these schools. We can create that opportunity. It's a win-win all the way around and incredibly cost effective. So that's one way, but we're going to need a lot of creativity, and we're going to need a lot of focus. People are going to have to advocate for this focus, or it will not get the attention it needs.
I think this is so important, Ross, and it's our job. It's our job as on this panel, everyone who's on the webinar. We have to make it clear that we are not going to catch up instructionally by ramping up instructional time. That's not how children learn. That children learn through social and emotional as well as intellectual capacities. And so if we think that we're going to be able to bulldoze our way into catching up academically, it's just a completely wrong-headed notion. It's going to fail, and it's going to actually compound the problem. So we need to be advocating for the same goal, helping kids to catch up, and how to use SEL to make sure they catch up as quickly as possible. That's the whole idea of optimal feasible, right? We want to do the best we can do, but what we can do realistically.
You know, David, can I just say two other quick things that Maurice just made me think of? One, somebody in the chat mentioned community schools, promise neighborhoods. Like, we have some models that we should be looking to and understanding what's worked from that. What are the best ways of coordinating with community health, community mental health, community partners? The second is to recognize schools that had stronger school climate and a stronger sense of community before this are going to have it through this and have that as a resource when they come back. And I think we really have to think, how are we preparing for the longer term? One way is by investing in strong school climates and saying that's something students and families deserve, not something nice to have, not something that's only important to the extent it contributes to other goals. It's actually a primary need as well.
I would just add one other thought to that, which is just really thinking about this with an equity lens, because we all know there was all sorts of inequities before, and those are only going to be exacerbated by this. So when we are ramping up and getting back to schools, we really need to be thinking about what are the resources and supports that we can provide to sort of our most vulnerable kids.
Thank you. And I think we have time, Sue, for one more question. Would you bring up the number one question that you want to share out? Thank you.
Let's see. And one more question would be, how can we influence policymakers to develop an SEL education reform program?
All right, so we talked a little bit about this when we had this a little bit of back and forth between mandated, supported, community-driven, policy-driven, law-driven, but what are some examples of some highly effective influencers or examples of times where policymakers have been influenced in a positive way to support the social emotional development? Here, I just want to call out CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning, and their Collaborative States Initiative and their Collaborative District Initiative, which has been really successful to a certain extent, in a large extent of creating the space for local communities to talk about social and emotional learning, for local boards of education to look at SEL guidelines in different states and say, hey, our state cares about this. So I just want to give a quick shout out to CASEL for their work in that context. But I'd like to open this up to you guys as well. Where have you seen success in policy driving high quality social emotional implementation?
Well, this is Maurice. I've seen success on the ground with SEL for US, which focuses a lot on helping create, again, not just broad policies, but on the ground policies, very specific policies. And at the state level, we have to be thinking a lot more now at the state level than at the federal level. And there are excellent examples of how states have been able to move forward, and also some localities. That's what I was saying before. We have to be able to learn from the successes that are out there, because there are many, and then replicate that to the extent that we can in our current environments. But I do think there are examples. There are also a whole network of national schools of character that people can look at to see how whole schools have implemented this approach effectively. The problem right now is that there's no sort of central repository to put it all together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, and David, I mean, there's been a lot of action, for instance, among state policymakers. I think connecting this to the idea of safe and supportive schools is an important one. I will say there's been a lot of action in the last few years on putting SEL standards, creating state policy around SEL standards, statewide standards. And I think I understand that can be an important way of calling everybody to this work and of sort of creating a framework within which it can happen. But I also, I'm worried. I talked about the need to have a richer definition, especially around adolescence. Identity development and agency development aren't generally included in those. So we really got to be doubling back and making sure we've got the equity dimensions right as we put those standards in. And then we have to be really thoughtful about how do we have state leadership, networking, resources, elevating promising practice, but not create a compliance mandate where people are just implementing somebody else's program, because this is adaptive work. This is work that happens in the context of community, in the context of relationships. So there's absolutely a role for policy here, resourcing this, prioritizing this, again, elevating promising practice, but not creating compliance mandates. One, that, as Maurice pointed out, we don't always have the capacity and the infrastructure for, but two, because we need for local leaders to be stepping up and creating this in the context of their community.
Outstanding. In the 3 minutes we have left, I just want to thank everybody for coming together here on hashtag SEL Day. Right now, we're about 850,000 people online who have seen the hashtag SEL Day. We're looking for 1 million today. So this webinar is going to be something that gets us closer. And what I want to do as we just close it out is if we could just briefly go around, starting with Anastasia, and I think we lost Ariel, but we'll get him back another time. But speaking of Anastasia, give a shout out to somebody who's helped you build SEL skills for SEL Day. And then we will take some time to close the panel out. So Anastasia, do you have somebody who has helped you build SEL skills for this SEL Day today? Oh, you're muted.
I want to shout out 2 people, and my principal, Miss Yuji, who's in the chat, and my advisor, Miss De Blasi. Those 2 have really been working with me with the emotional aspect, and just by inviting me to do this panelist, I'm learning so much. And just telling during this time of the pandemic, just really keeping in contact and making sure that I'm okay on an emotional level, because you know it could be hard not being at school and being at home, and just making sure that I'm okay. So I would like to give a shout out to them.
Great job, thank you, Anna. And again, Ariel,
can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah.
We can hear you, but we can't see you. But give us a shout out, man. Thanks.
Well, I'd like to shout out everybody in the panel. You guys really opened my eyes to like the DOE and how you guys actually like care about the students and want to push for like social emotional learning. I'd also like to give a shout out to Nick Stradweiser, one of my deans, for, as I alluded to earlier, for actually taking the time to like teach us students the importance of, you know, responsibility and all these other social emotional skills in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Ariel. You came back in. You're like, I heard my name. I'm not gonna let you down. Appreciate it. Kristen, you got a shout out for somebody who's helped you develop SEL skills on this hashtag SEL Day?
There's so many people. I mean, I can't name them all, but I'll shout out the panel. You know, you guys have inspired me 100%. You know, I read your work, I follow all of you, and I'm just amazed at where SEL has gone, and I'm looking forward to where it's going to go. And I just want to say to everybody on this call, you know, we are all in some fashion, form, or way. We are change agents, we are thought leaders, we are pioneers, we are trailblazers, we are SEL champions. So make sure that you don't just walk away from this without implementing things into your own life and taking it to each one, reach one, teach one, so that we can spread SEL all over the world. And then also want to make sure that, you know, in a time of uncertainty, this is when we create opportunity. This is when real leaders create opportunities. So in times of uncertainty, make sure you're creating opportunity every day, and make sure that you understand that just because we're social distancing doesn't mean we don't still have a social responsibility. All right. So that's what I want to tell you guys. And thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed everything about today. I'm very motivated to keep moving forward and keep doing the work.
Thank you, Kristen, and thank you for your motivation. Heather, got a shout out for somebody who helped you develop some SEL skills or SEL competencies?
I'm going to shout out to my mom, Phyllis Riemann, for being my first and best teacher on social emotional learning. And then shout out to my twin 7-year-olds for giving me a lot of practice with those skills the last 2 weeks as I homeschooled them.
You can never go wrong shouting out your mom. I got love for that. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to build on one thing Kristen said, which is that let's take this moment and to think about like how we reimagine schools in the way that we have always wanted them to be, and in a way that works with kids and creates equitable learning environments for kids. And let's not accept sort of the status quo or what we had before. This is a moment to sort of re-envision what we think schools need to be.
Wonderful. Thank you, Heather. Speaking of re-envisioning, Maurice, do you have a shout out for somebody who's helped you re-envision your social emotional development?
I've got a couple of shout outs. One is to you, David Adams, and Nova Biro, who have spearheaded the work on International SEL Day tirelessly in ways that I think very few people can appreciate. But when you look at those numbers, they're responsible for the vast majority of them. And I just want to also give a shout out to my lab, and especially our social media unit, which has been pushing out information about SEL Day all over.
Absolutely.
And I think it's, as everyone has said, this is something that is just the beginning, and we have to keep at it.
Thank you, Maurice. Last but not least, Ross, give me a shout out for somebody who's helped you develop your social emotional skills.
I'm going to give 2 shout outs. I'm also going to give a shout out to you, David. I mean, you've been such a leader in this, and I've been like, it has been so great to learn on this panel today, but over these last couple of years about your leadership on SEL at Urban Assembly has been a real font of inspiration for me. The other folks that I want to shout out to are my school principals and Ms. Lockard and Mr. Johnson in particular. When I think back and realize how much they really were focused on creating that sense of belonging and community. And yes, they wanted everybody to learn their academics, but they knew that being seen as an individual person and being loved was actually the foundation for that learning and for being able to become your best self. So I'm grateful to them and all the school principals who are stepping up right now and making sure that their students and their families are getting what they need in these trying times. So thank you for including me today. It's been an amazing conversation.
Thank you so much, Ross, and thank you all of our panelists for coming in. I want to give a shout out to our people on the first line, who on the front line, I should say, who are engaging with people who are sick, who are ill, and giving their best that they can. I want to thank my mom. I got to take it from Heather and my dad for putting me on a great path. This is hashtag SEL Day. It's our first hashtag SEL Day. This was supposed to be down in Washington, D.C., but it's just as good over here on this briefing that we had online. Thank you for everything that you guys have done. We are capturing the chat online, so we will be able to pull out some questions and give it to the panelists. Have a wonderful day. Hashtag SEL, go online, talk about the work that you're doing, talk about the people who've influenced you. And Kristen, you wanna set us off?
Yes, I just want to say that we launched a video today. I'm so proud of my students. Shout out to DCPS. We shot this video on Roosevelt State last June, and it's talking about all the SEL competencies in the hallways, what kids go through. So please check out Dangers of the Mind on social media, on our Twitter. We're going to be launching the video probably, it might have already been launched with our social media people, but if not, it'll be launched by this afternoon. Really excited about it, really proud of our kids, and keep going, keep pushing forward with SEL, guys.
All right, well, happy SEL Day, everybody. Thank you for being on the webinar, and we will see you soon. Thank you, Anastasia. Thank you, Ariel. Thank you, Heather, Maurice, Kristen, and Ross. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Wonderful.